Hey guys, I hope you're all having a fantastic day. If this is the first time in my channel, I would like to welcome you. If this is not your first time in my channel, I would like to welcome you back, and thank you by the way for coming back. My name is Hugh. Today we're having our third video on our Devlog series. Today, I'm going to show you what happened this past week. So basically, we're recreating my very first video game. It was a flight simulator, if you can even call it a simulator. But you know, you had your plane, you had to shoot down the enemy, and that was it. So we're recreating that, but now we're doing it better. This past week, I focused my time on recreating, or actually creating, a brand new physics simulation from within Unity. So let's jump right in. Maybe we can all learn something about this. So let's get started. Oh, and by the way, somebody told me that my audio sucked, so I basically grabbed this mic. Hopefully it's better now, so let's jump right in. I started Unity, which took way too long because this was the first time I was opening the program after it got installed. And the plan is to create a box model of our plane. I know what you may be asking, but you, why are we creating a box version of our plane? Shouldn't we just create a 3D model and call it a day? The reason is, boxes are simple. Boxes have 6 faces, and that's all we need to calculate. Instead, if we create a 3D model and we start adding physics, our poor little CPU is gonna need to do way too many calculations. And after making sure that the physics actually worked, which was definitely needed and not just me playing around in the editor, I proceeded to look for some of the airplane measurements so I could scale the cube accordingly to the approximate fuselage size. Then I continued with the wings. For the wings, I decided to create 1 cube per half wing, so 4 half wings in total. So we could simulate wings that are breaking up mid-flight. This is a dogfighting game after all. After I created the wings, I wanted to make sure that the scale was correct, so I created a couple of planes and attached the airplane blueprint as a texture. That way I could scale each component to kind of match the real proportions. Once I finished, then I started with the landing gear. Since it has been 4 years since the time I have used Unity last, I did not recall how to properly use the wheel collider. So I created a couple of cylinders and attached the wheel collider directly to those. Then I created a small sphere to attach as a tail skid. And here's where everything starts to go south. The wheels seemed to be way too bouncy, and for some reason they were skidding left to right. So I started by adding the correct weight to the fuselage, but that didn't really solve anything. So I removed the cylinders and created the first wheel collider on the fuselage rigid body, only to find out that you can only have 1 wheel collider per rigid body. You can see my expertise coming up over here. So I did what any sane person would do. Go through the official Unity training program inside the Unity Learn and spend the whole week working and just kidding, just looked it up on YouTube. I saw a great video from Bit Galaxies, link in the description by the way, which showed everything I needed. So I went ahead and created my empty game objects, added the wheel colliders, and same result. I continued blindly changing option after option until it worked. After that, I attached a hinge joint to the cylinder that was representing the propeller and also set its mass to 173 kilograms. Why? Isn't that way too much for a wooden fan? Well, let's take a history class real quick. Throughout history, in aviation, we see mainly 6 types of engines: radial engines, opposing cylinder engines, turboprop engines, jet engines, turbofan engines, and rotary engines. And I'm not talking about the Mazda RX-7 Dorito engine. I'm talking about full engines that rotate. Sounds weird, right? Well, here's why. The year is 1917. Just 13 years after humanity's first powered flight by the Wright brothers. And just 41 years after the first autocycle engine was created. You know, the famous 4-stroke engine? Those engines had more basic materials than we see today, and there was a big problem: heat. In today's day and age, engines are cooled by different cooling systems that allow engines to run at the right temperature. In propeller-driven planes, usually engines are air-cooled by the strong airflow that goes over the cylinders thanks to the airspeed. However, back then, planes were much slower. Friction within the engine was higher and combustion was less efficient. So engineers back then thought, how can we use air to cool this engine? Of course, let's just spin the whole thing. And boom, the rotary engine was born. We have a mass of around 170 kilograms or 375 pounds, rotating at 1300 RPM, powering a plane made of wood and fabric. What could possibly go wrong? Well, let's put it simple. Pilots back then said that their fates would either involve a wooden cross, the Red Cross, or a Victoria Cross. So that says a lot. For the engine, I added a hinge joint with a motor that will allow me to control the engine speed via code. So I created a script and just enabled the motor. However, this is where my disregard for the past 4 years for Unity shows up. It took me like an hour to make Visual Studio connect with Unity. When I finally connected it correctly, I added the script to convert from angular velocity to RPM. The idea for me here was to actually identify how quickly the motor was spinning, and my target is to make the engine spin at around 1250 to 1300 RPM maximum. But for some reason, I couldn't get it to that RPM no matter what. So I added the add relative torque to the rigid body function, but still no luck. But I said, this is a problem for tomorrow's zero. So I moved on to creating the thrust force script, which according to the Central Hub for Aeronautical Theory, Guidance, Procedures, and Training, ChatGPT, is a lumped constant to accommodate for the efficiency and unit adjustments, times the air density, times the propeller rotation to the power of 2, and then the propeller diameter. So in terms we have 0.1 times 1.225 times RPM divided by 60 to the power of 2 times 2.7. Is this formula correct? I don't know, but it works, so let's leave it like that. Then I modified that placeholder cylinder just to have the diameter of the Clerk A7B engine, which is the engine that the Sopwith Camel used, approximately 90 centimeters. And it started working. We finally have some trust. But then, this happened. After tinkering around for way too long, I found out that the collider was not centered, so this was causing vibrations on the plane. So I went ahead and recentered the collider, but the issue was still there, just a little bit different. Then, once I found that out, I started messing around with the wheel colliders once again, and it solved that issue, but guess what? Plane started sliding sideways again. After finding that out, I did what any sane, responsible, and working person would do. Procrastinate the issue until later. So, I said, let's switch gears. I really want to visualize the forces that I'm applying to the plane. In order to do this, I started tinkering around with the line renderer, and everything went pretty well until I had to attach a script to it. For some reason, there was no way that I could make that script actually recognize the components of the line renderer. It was not picking the color, position, size, nothing. For example here, I try to call the function setStart. However, it is not picking it up. It says that it's wrong, that there's an error, because it was not being recognized. I'm gonna pause the video right now to see if you can spot the issue. Well, 25 minutes later, I found out my dumb mistake. I named the new class Line Renderer. So whenever I try to call line renderer, the component from Unity, it was trying to call itself. So it was never gonna pick up anything. I was basically calling the script itself. So I renamed the class over to line controller. And would you look at that? It just started working. Well, sort of, but good enough for now. I added a public float and a vector3 so I can call this line controller script from each one of the rigid bodies that have a force being applied to them, so I can easily see all the forces without having to rewrite the script every single time. Now that I have a working engine which is producing thrust and a kind of working landing gear, I decided I will start scripting the lift. So, in order to understand the lift dynamics, we need to understand a couple of concepts here: air density and angle of attack, and lift coefficient. I'm gonna put them in simple terms. The density of an object refers to the mass it has given a specific volume. If we grab a cube, a 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter cube, and we fill it out with water up to the brim, that cube is gonna weigh exactly 1000 kilograms, 1 metric ton. So we can say that the density of water is 1000 kilograms per cubic meter. Let's do the same example with air. If we take a cube that's 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter and we fill it out with air, that cube is gonna weigh 1.293 kilograms. So we can say the density of air is 1.293 kilograms per cubic meter at sea level. Basically, as you go higher and higher in the atmosphere, the air density is gonna go down. If we don't simulate that inside of Unity, we can climb indefinitely. We can reach 100,000 feet in a biplane, so that's not gonna happen in real life. And then we have angle of attack. It's the angle between that chord line and the incoming wing. This actually contributes quite a bit in the third term that we have, which is the coefficient of lift. The lift coefficient is a number that is used to model like all the complex dependencies of shape, inclination, and the flow conditions of the lift. And yes, the angle of attack actually comes into play here. So now that we have all of these concepts, let's have our friend ChatGPT pull us a simplified formula for the lift calculation. And we ended up with this. Actually, it is working. As you can see, all the lines are coming up, the wings representing the force that is being added to the rigid bodies. And everything is working really good, like the first time. This is incredible. So let's enable the actual rigid body over here.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
Well, as you can tell, I'm starting to get pretty used to starting over once again. By this point, I try to take things in a positive way, so I decided I was gonna fix the wheel colliders. How did I fix those? Well, basically just got rid of those and attached a couple cylinders with mesh colliders and a hinge joint. And it did the trick. It worked like a charm, almost first time. So that's pretty cool. And after I figured those out, I went back and tried to fix the lift script. I know the reason why Unity crashed. Basically, since the angle of attack calculation was too jittery, once the airplane actually slammed down into the terrain, it caused a huge spike. It was so big that it went over the memory allocation that Unity has. I'm gonna explain this later on. This is related to the floating point precision physics that Unity has. So the way I fixed this was that I interpolated the value from the current angle of attack to the new angle of attack. So it's a gradual transition from whatever angle there was to a new one instead of a direct spike. This actually bit me in the back later on, but I'll show you when that happens. For now, let's just appreciate our beautiful boxy plane on its maiden flight. Yeah, we're finally flying. After taking a break from that beautiful flight, the plane actually had some control issues. Or, well, the main issue is that there was no way to control it. And it was pretty unstable. The reason it was unstable was because of the center of gravity. The Sopwith Camel especially has a very forward biased center of gravity. So I created an empty object which allowed me to modify the center of gravity of my whole plane, which allowed me to center it a little bit forward, and that way the plane actually flew much better. Now back to the control. Airplanes do use what we call control surfaces in order to control how they move. We have the elevator controlling the pitch, we have the ailerons controlling the roll, and we have the rudder controlling the yaw. Now, in order to implement these control surfaces to our actual plane, it was really simple. We already had our lift script. That lift script already took the angle between the plane movement and the actual rigid body, so I did not cheat on the lift script. So I just needed to add a couple more rigid bodies, have a way to control their rotation with a spring, and then it just worked. Now we have an elevator, and just look at that beautiful plane with all the vectors pointing ahead. So yeah, I still had to figure out the balance a little bit more, and we crashed, but I mean, it's something. I was still not happy how my plane was handling. It was more like a hit or miss kind of situation. So I thought about doing the drop test. I basically took the plane 3,000 meters up in the y-axis and just let it drop. With this test, I actually found many issues with the lift script. First of all, I had to isolate those issues, so I disabled all lift scripts and just left the vertical stabilizer script on. That actually let me focus on one single axis and find out what was happening. And what I found out is that the smoothing function that I implemented previously on the lift script actually was smoothing that angle of attack way too much. It was taking too long for the angle of attack to get updated. So the control surfaces were acting upon a value that did not exist anymore. So what I did here was just increase the time factor of this lerp function, and it seems like it solved the issue. As you can see, we're falling straight down, but I want you to notice how that vector is flickering a little bit once it gets too small. So we're kind of still having that same initial issue in a smaller level, so it shouldn't make Unity crash. Different day over here. I wanted to point out real quick something about problem solving, which is a very good skill to have whenever you're scripting. So, sometimes problems may seem a little too huge for you to tackle at the same time. In those cases, the best thing that you can do is dissect those issues. Like what we did over here. We actually had 4 wings, 4 ailerons, 1 elevator, and 1 rudder acting at the same time. We didn't know which was contributing to the instability that we had. So we removed all the scripts from all the game objects. Hey there. We removed all scripts from all the objects except for the rudder. And that way we actually found out the issue. Once we applied the solution to that single surface, it actually solved everything else. I'm not saying it's going to be like that every single time. Sometimes you're going to solve one issue and another one is going to come up. But when the second issue comes up, you just do the same thing. You dissect that huge issue into its smaller parts until you actually solve each one of those components. So, just a quick tip. Back to the video. And after tweaking a couple more parameters on the lift script and re-enabling it for our wings, elevator, and rudder, we are actually left off with this.
Yes! Yes! Yes!
I think I got a little bit too excited about that. Sorry. Anyways, moving on. Now that we have an actual flying plane, I wanted to incorporate a bit of a camera system. So what I did was that I created an empty game object and attached the camera to it. Then I needed to find out a script that allowed me to rotate the camera as well as switching from third person to first person view. And I knew how I wanted the camera to behave on those two different views. I wanted the camera to have a little bit of momentum, so when the plane accelerates, the camera kind of falls behind the plane, but not that much, just a little bit, just to indicate a little bit of speed. And same thing for the first person view. I wanted to indicate that momentum of the camera once you're in the cockpit, but in a much lesser level. In order to accomplish this, I defined a couple of empty game objects, outside and inside the plane. And basically I created a vector3.lerp function that executed in the fixed update. So basically when Unity calculates the physics, in order to have the camera follow the plane around, and then we could switch between the two cameras. At the beginning it was kind of working, however on the cockpit camera it was not really working at all. The plane was like escaping from the camera, so I had to find another solution. And that's when I found this. Well, as you can tell by my shirt, it's yet another day. I know what you may be thinking. Gio, but Cinemachine was actually released years ago. Why you didn't think about it? Well, I didn't know it existed. So you can tell that that's the theme of this video. Gio scratching his head for hours or days at a time, just to then find out that there's already a solution implemented. But I guess that's part of learning, right? Right? Anyways, back to the video. Implementing Cinemachine was such an easy process. I just had to create two virtual cameras, and one of them, the outside one, was an orbit view, and the inside or cockpit camera was a free look camera. I just had to tweak a couple settings, the interpolation and how fast the camera was moving according to the plane, but this is what we have right now. As you can see, we actually have a flying plane. I'm so happy about this. We're doing great progress right now. Well, that's enough flying for today. I actually spent around 30 more minutes just playing around with the plane, so that's actually a good sign. It's pretty fun to fly around with that. As of now, we actually have a working flying model, and we have a flying plane as of now. We just need to attach a pretty looking 3D model to it, and we should call it a day. But maybe we can add a couple more things. Maybe some wind simulation, maybe some clouds, and maybe some environmental effects, but that's gonna be for later. For now, I'm pretty happy with the progress we did. As you can tell, it took me 2 weeks to create this video, 1 week actually developing the plane, and another week editing the video. It took me way too long to edit this video, so I would like to find ways to work on this a little bit quicker. Anyways, I really appreciate all of you guys who stayed down to the end of this video. If you like this video, I would really appreciate if you can hit that like and subscribe buttons. It's gonna really help me grow this channel, and share it around. Also, leave a comment down below. Give me your thoughts, any recommendations, or anything else that comes up to mind. So again, my name is Io. Thanks for watching, and see you later. Cheers!